Now, like Vlad said, I'd love to introduce the panel to you before we start a bit of a discussion about leadership for the greater good and about leadership in the future. So I'd like to introduce Sarah Downie. She is the CEO of the Shared Value Project and is responsible for the overall strategic direction and management of the Shared Value Project. Thank you. She has more than 20 years experience with cross-sectoral leadership, and thank you, Sarah, for joining us today. Next, we have Stephen Atkinson. He is the director of Rios Partners Melbourne, and for more than 20 years, as a management consultant, he has led key assignments of strategic impact for numerous multinational corporations and government institutions. Thank you, Stephen. Professor Bruce Thompson joins us he is the head of the Melbourne University School of Health Sciences, and previously was with Swinburne not too long ago. He's an active clinical scientist with more than 30 years experience working in hospitals, universities, the community sector, and business. He's a key opinion leader in respiratory medicine, nationally and internationally. And finally, we've got Chris Kotur. She is the leader in residence with Leadership Victoria, and she's been involved in community leadership since 1994. Her career includes senior executive and CEO roles, university pro-vice chancellor, council and board member, director, and trustee. Now I'd like to invite all four of the panelists to join us here on the lectern, to join us here on the high chairs. Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for giving your time today. I'd like to start off with quite a broad question and playing a bit on what Sam has introduced to us about some of the complexities and the multi-dimensional nature of leadership for the good. Now, from your profiles, I know that you're all individuals who help others to make sense of the complex problems of the world and to try to solve them, bringing people together. So what I'd first like to open the floor with is, in your opinion, what does leadership for the good look like? What's been done well? What's not been done so well? Do you have any specific examples that come to mind when you hear such a big question like this? And if you don't mind me picking on you, I might call Stephen to be first to answer this one. Unless you prefer to pass, that's an option too.
No, that's fine. Thank you. Well, just before we look at that, just thank you for sharing these insights. And to be honest, it's quite embarrassing. Haven't we gone from a D to a C+? Is that the best we can do? Anyway, lots to learn, I think, collectively. Just by way of introduction quickly, I guess, my firm and the company I work for is called Rios Partners. So we're a global social enterprise, if you like. We work with groups of people, disparate groups of people who don't necessarily get along, don't work well together, but share common challenges. So I think when we think about work for the social good and what leadership looks like, we look at it through a particular lens, and the lens we look at is through this complexity. So tackling issues of high complexity. And we look at that in three ways. One we call social complexity, which Sam has referred to, whereby the conditions of the situation mean that no particular organisation or individual on their own right by themselves can tackle this problem successfully. They require working with others, whether they like it or not. Sometimes with colleagues, often with as far as enemies. So in this particular context, sometimes the only thing they have in common is a dissatisfaction with the status quo. So that's the first type of complexity that we work with. The second type that sits within that is dynamic complexity or systemic complexity, where cause and effect are far apart in time and space. From a health point of view, we fall over, we bleed, we can see what's going on. Smoking, however, we don't notice for a while, and then something else happens. So in these situations of high dynamic complexity, they involve more than just parts on their own, which we often see in leadership. We're just working on a part. We need to look at the whole. So there's something systemic about that. And then the third type of complexity, if you think about these as overlapping circles, if you like, or a Venn diagram, is around what we call generative complexity. And we're seeing a lot of this now, whereby we're facing challenges, issues that have no precedent. We don't have a fallback. We can't rely on our best practice because it doesn't exist. You know, what we've done in the past may not be sufficient for the future. So there's a requirement here for something that's a bit more creative in how we do things. So this combination of experimentation, creativity, combined with our capacity to work together and collaborate, combined with our systemic, holistic view, is often the kind of problems that we find ourselves in. So I think leadership here in that context is how do we play in that little space in the middle, that where these three intersecting circles actually sit, and what does that take? I don't think we're trained very well on that. I don't think we collectively as society, a lot of our leadership that we do is a lot more linear. And I think that's the big learning that we have, how to operate in the space of higher complexity, particularly as we're facing more and more of these unprecedented, and as you say, some of these overlapping complex challenges.
Thank you, Stephen. And did anyone else want to follow up with something particular to their sector or to add on a perspective to Stephen's?
My perspective, I'm going to make much more recent and probably raw, which is just based on the last couple of months of work that I've been doing. So congratulations on the index, by the way, and I hope that you crack open a whole lot of conversations about leadership that are so timely. So I think that's a wonderful initiative. So apart from the work that I do with Leadership Victoria, if I just give you one example of complexity and searching for the common good, let me just say that in this example that I'm going to give you, I've stopped searching for it. And there's a reason for that I'll explain in just a moment. So I also work as a freelance facilitator and somebody who works on strategy and works closely with leaders. And in fact, on the earlier slide, I think the only group that I'm not working with at the moment is the mining group. Everybody else is part of the story that I'm about to...
I'm sure you could break into mining.
I'm sure there's some digging in some of the work. So if I think about, so every year I would work with probably 20 local councils. Every year I would work with state government. I worked on those 3 royal commissions, and in each case have hung around for the implementation of a whole lot of those recommendations and how to make that work happen. Probably the most complex has been the Mental Health Royal Commission. Started out in terms of reference before COVID came along. And the Family Violence Law Commission. And then the other one is public health networks around the state and how different people work together across a region. Different geography, different starting points, different sizes, different power, their own governance arrangements. The question for me is, why should they actually work together? Like, why? Just because somebody in government thought it was a good idea? So having been a ministerial advisor, I know sometimes that, I don't know what's that. Good ideas. This is chatting now. So good ideas come from all over the place, but they're often not thought through in terms of implementation. But the example that probably I've found over the last couple of months, a year and a bit, that's vexed me the most. So in those 3 royal commissions, I think I've had interviews with maybe 8,000 Victorians. It's much easier to get common ground around what the problems are than what the solutions are. Particularly when all of the solutions end up being in contest and consensus is impossible. And there are some enemies to common good that I see all the time, and I'm not entirely sure what to do about them, but I haven't given up on it yet. The first is self-interest. In other words, I matter much more than you do. I'm being kind of hypothetical. That's probably true too. And so I'll make decisions on that basis. Then the other one is short-termism. I mean, don't ask me to use my imagination into next year because I could barely get there. If you're into Maslow, I'm crawling down right around the bottom. As long as I'm okay, and we've got food, we've got shelter, we've got a bit of money, we're probably healthy, and the family's kind of within our sight line, we're probably okay. Don't ask me to think about any kind of big future thing. And the energy crisis, I'll only worry about it when the bills come in or when the lights go off. There's self-interest, short-termism, and the other one is decisions made on popularism. In other words, I need your affection, I care about whether or not you like me, and so I'll make decisions on that basis. At least this is me that I'm talking about. I'm sure that you're all much more sophisticated than I am. But the one that I think troubles me the most is that I'm also on a government panel reviewing the trial of the medically supervised injecting room in Richmond. And if you're aware of that, and you probably are because there's all sorts of hysteria in the press about this every few weeks because of citizen journalism and citizen photography. It is a small area in North Richmond, tiny piece of geography. It has 5,000 people living in social housing on that block. There are at least 5 state government departments that all work in silos and have a drawbridge. This, by the way, is not breaking news. If you've ever worked with government, you understand that that's what goes on. We love our silos. We have every level of government represented in that group, and we've got probably one of the most diverse communities in Victoria. And we have a safe injecting room, which is being trialled. And I could be waiting for a very, very, very long time to find common anything in that community. Through all the consultations and all the conversations that we have week in and week out. So my choices are, you either try to find the answer to what would better look like, small, bite-sized opportunities for improvement, or I wait until I've got consensus and change the world, because we now all agree in the common good. I've learned, I guess, over the years that in some instances it's not available. And the choice that I make is that I work anyway in that space. So I'd love the common good to be more about. In fact, life as a CEO, as a Pro-Vice Chancellor and working in Mrs. Office was much easier than working in the community, which is full of the messes that we all create. And I guess the other thing I'd say about that is that what keeps me going is a set of values. And there's that lovely Irish saying that says, in the shadow of each other we live, which is that this is shared responsibility and we're all in this together. And so there's where I go looking for the common good, and I accept, particularly these last couple of weeks which have been hard, that's not always available. Does that mean that you stop looking for it? No. So that's my answer.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that concrete example. I think resonated with members of the audience who can think of having that example to really play on and to work this idea out. Now, Bruce, I saw you scribbling there, so I'm going to pass to you.
I did write a few notes because it actually, what was just said did definitely resonate for me, especially trying to find the common ground, which is also the common good. Now, it could be actually a laser point, or probably could be a little bit further expanded. And if we're thinking about leadership, there was this virus called SARS-CoV-2, has this condition called COVID. Don't know if you've heard about it, however, really changed the world just a little tad. And quite frankly, at the beginning of, I remember when I was here, Linda Christensen asked me to speak a little bit about COVID, this thing in January, February of 2020, and she asked me to speak at one of the BC town halls, and I said, look, yeah, no worries, don't worry about it. It's all okay, because at the end of the day, 800,000 people have influenza every year. There's 500 deaths. This is a very serious condition, influenza. This is probably just the same. Make sure you wash your hands and what have you, and all that sort of stuff. It was interesting actually doing that same talk, watching it over the years as unfolding, where ultimately the construct is still right, except the mortality of that particular condition is higher. So the mortality of COVID sits around about 3%. And so that's fine. Got 100 people in the room. You three can take it for the team, not me. Self-interest, remember? So that's fine. So, but when you multiply that on a population level, it's millions of people. And we only need to look now, this year, we've killed more people with COVID in this beginning of this year than we've had for the whole pandemic because of the change in the transmission rules. So decisions needed to be made, and I was the president of the Thoracic Society of Australia and New Zealand, which is the peak respiratory body of all the doctors and what have you. And so therefore this is a respiratory disease, had something to do with this, and a whole lot to do with it. And when we're talking about before, where at the end of the day, we actually don't know what we were doing. Quite frankly, have no idea. So a person comes in with this COVID, never heard of it before, this is a new name, good knows what it is. So what do you do with someone that's sitting in front of you with this escalating pneumonia that we know is a virus and there's no treatment for it? We have no idea what you're doing, and by the way, I can catch it. Oh my God, I don't want to do that. I've got young children. And this person just died in front of me, and so therefore put this level of fear amongst the profession that I've never seen before. Frankly frightened. And then somehow you had to try and get sense around this. And one of the notes I actually wrote was when you mentioned about the injection rooms. I had some research that I did where injection rooms medically administered heroin in the UK has been demonstrated in a number of randomised controlled trials of 25,000 people each, published in the New England Journal, Lancet, and what have you. When you do that, it reduces the street use of IV drugs down to less than 15%. So, and on top of that, so this is basically, hi, you're an addict? Oh, okay, no problems, I will give you heroin. You come in here and I'll medically administer it to you because you know that will actually reduce the use of street use of heroin down to less than 20% for the individual, and they'll also stop smoking marijuana and what have you. So prevention of harm, it's very, very good. But for some reason, data just, who gives a shit about the evidence, because my belief suggests that's bad. So it's really hard, and we had the same issue with COVID, of trying to actually stick to the evidence and stick to our guns, even for the profession. So you remember the PPE issue? I had PPE PTSD, where at the end of the day, I truly do, this is what's been talked about amongst a number of people, where the ferocity of the profession about, I demand to have N95 masks, absolutely demand it. So this was put to me as the leader of the profession. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to do a literature review, I'm going to do a Cochrane analysis to find the evidence for me to be able to go to the Chief Health Officer of the nation to say, we really do need it. Because they didn't have supply, we didn't even have any, and there's a significant cost. And if there's no evidence to support it, then why is we as taxpayers paying for it? So we did this Cochrane review, the evidence was a little bit dicey, and the board rolled me. I don't give a shit about the evidence, quote unquote, we will do it. And so even for people who rely on their evidence, this is our raison d'etre, was so scared, not interested in it. So you have to actually try and get common ground and make some sense of this. You know, what are we going to do? And I had the Secretary of Health saying, hey Bruce, you need to actually stand up to the physicians and tell them they don't have what it takes to practice in a pandemic. Oh, thanks Brendan, really helpful. And so then, and the physicians were trying to roll me for not supporting them, but finding common ground to say, stick to what we know in that profession. Now, we've got to do this to the public because we've got this thing called a vaccine that at the end of the day, you're not going to have some person tell me that I need to have an injection. Why would I do that for? I'm not going to be told. No, I'm not frightened of it. No, I'm not scared, but I'm not going to have some leader tell me what to do. And the problem is if you've got COVID now, moving across here, and especially because I'm immunocompromised, I take methotrexate for my rheumatoid arthritis. If I catch it, I'm in really big hot water. So why are you allowed to actually walk around and be totally, vaccine free and have truckloads of COVID and infect the whole community? And so this is a really, really difficult decision. We also heard one of our leaders say, government leaders, especially about if we have close contact, then why, and my son's got COVID, why should I be locked in for? I mean, it's not fair that I have to be locked down because my son, who I live with, has got COVID. Well, this is a condition that we've talked about has mortality associated with it. So if you had changed the policy to increase transmission, by definition, mortality goes up. If you have a policy that decreases transmission, like lockdowns and all that stuff, mortality goes down. Pretty simple. So that person made a decision that I want to increase the transmission, so I have made a decision that it's quite okay to kill more people. That is a direct consequence of those words that were said. So own it. That's okay. sorry, take it for the team. She'll be right. I don't want to get it. I want to muck around. That's perfectly fine. That's where I get a little frustrated with some leaders who don't wish to find the common ground, and then it's their own self-interest that is at stake here.
And thanks, Bruce, for bringing up the idea of common ground. And I think I would like to turn to Sarah, who represents the Shared Value Project.
He's a bloody drug user and got COVID.
And so she doesn't have it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, sorry.
I killed of an IV user, and I don't have COVID. I'm all good. Thank you. I've just actually really enjoyed listening to all three of you. I was going to just get quiet. I guess the lens that I bring to this conversation is, one of thinking about the role of business. And so the Shared Value Project is really about trying to promote this idea to business that it should think about creating value that can be shared. So create value that is actually for the common good, but not to do so through a philanthropic thought process, but to do so because actually businesses thrive when the community thrives. But actually businesses are part of the community, and somehow we've gotten away from the idea that it should consider the health of the community that it's in as an advantage for business. So when I think about leadership, what's interesting to me is that I do think that businesses are stepping up. I mean, I had a really good look at the index, and it's kind of on par badly with everyone else. But there are pockets where I have more optimism, and perhaps because of the reasons that my fellow panellists have talked about. It is incredibly complex to work in the ecosystem and in systems, and businesses realise that, and they realise that they can't do things on their own, and that they have to join forces, sometimes with their competitors, very often with government and with the not-for-profit sector, if they're actually going to improve the systems that ultimately will help their own businesses. And some of them are more obvious than others. If you take insurance, for an example, it's a really obvious one where if the health of people, that's going to be better for business. So there are some obvious places where we see business kind of stepping forward, but they do realise it's complex, and there are certainly some promising signs, I think, that leaders realise they need to step up, that they're getting really significant pressure from all of their stakeholders to do so, their employees, yes, their customers, their suppliers, their partners, very personally, very selfishly, their kids, absolutely. So this pressure has come in a way that I don't think we've seen come to business and ask them to step up in ways that they haven't stepped up before. I think how big is the common good is a good question. I think where business is focused is a little more tightly, is a bit more what is the problem that intersects with their business, that they have a genuine role and opportunity to play in. So I don't think it is as big and complex as the sorts of things that you're talking about. So they have a little bit more, I guess, power to make some changes. So it's a little less complex, maybe in that field, and I think we're starting to see some leadership, if that's the right word. I guess the other maybe point that I wanted to say is who are the leaders? I think when most people think of leaders, and when I'm sort of thinking about business, people generally go to the CEO or something like that. I see a lot of leadership in all levels of business, and I think it is still very individually led. So for me, when I think about leadership, it's individuals within those businesses that actually want to make a difference, that see the connection, and are looking for those opportunities to partner in ways that they haven't partnered before. And I think that's quite exciting. So I know it's complex, but there are little pockets of things that should give us some optimism, I think.
Thank you for that. And in looking at all of your bios and playing around on your organization's website, I did find a theme that was quite common in some of the work that you all do. And for Stephen and with Rio's partners, it was a real emphasis on challenging the status quo. For Bruce, in his Future of Leadership series video that he did with us, he talked about asking questions, but doing so respectfully and with kindness. For Sarah, on the Shared Value Project's website, I saw rethinking relationships as a way of challenging the status quo. And for Chris, when you were talking about finding a purpose, I saw a lot about, again, asking questions as a method for bringing people together. Now, with that, I guess, theme that I've drawn out here, is there anything that brings up that you'd like to speak to?
So I think in healthcare, it's quite okay to start asking questions that people probably found difficult to ask, and I think it's a maturity issue, where, and especially the medical profession, it's really very, very tight, and it's everyone knows each other in some way. Like I went to med school with each other, I was at uni together, or registrar, all that sort of thing. So it is extremely tight, and also very conservative in many areas as well. And so, and you're talking about, and it also can be potentially very threatening for the actual practicing clinician as well. And I remember making a comment early in my time as the board of the TSANZ of why can't we find a cure for asthma? It affects 1 in 9 people, there's hundreds of thousands of people that have this condition. You have tens of thousands that roll up to hospital unnecessarily and kills people. Excuse me. So I think it's 2022 and it's just unacceptable people die of it. And I may think, why can't we find a cure? Oh, you can't do that. Because you can't say those words. And my wife has a condition that's a progressive neurological, she uses a wheelchair. And she said to me, I want you to find a cure for this. Why are you trying to find a cure? Asthma should be curing this condition. Fair enough. So let's how will I go about? Because if she doesn't hear the word cure, she doesn't have hope, and that's critically important. Excuse me. Is you need to have some sort of hope, and so therefore you need to have the confidence, in a respectful way, to be saying actually that's not okay. So we had a cool change in 2016. Remember, end of November, bit of a cool change. Killed 10 people unnecessarily, put 8,000 people in the hospital and had 33,000 people with an exacerbation. How's that okay? That's respectful, and you're allowed to ask it. I don't think this is okay. I don't think our medications for asthma are okay because they're very symptomatic relief only. They don't change the course of the treatment. That's not okay. That's okay. We just need to do better. And I think that's where we as leaders can actually do ask those questions, and then actually put our shoulder to the wheel of actually let's try and fix it. And that's the next step about it.
So on the questions, I think I've learnt that the reason that I ask questions, and I try to ask them questions, but I think the only thing that really matters in that is that I listen really well. Because it's the listening. And what happens in the 3 Royal Commissions and a lot of the other inquiries that I've worked in, it's about collecting people's stories. And then having the opportunity to assemble some of those and look for common elements in that. I think that's really, really important. And I've asked over the years, my questions have been simpler and simpler and simpler. And now I'm much more about asking, what does better look like? What small thing could we do to improve the situation? You see, I've stopped in some of the work that I'm doing, looking for the common ground and sort of stepping alongside it, if that makes sense. Because I'm looking for solutions. I've got plenty of stuff about the problems. People are very articulate about what's not working. So something about and probably, but maybe, no, it was more sophisticated. But in 3 Royal Commissions, the heartland questions have been what didn't work, what hasn't worked, what has worked, or what about next time? And what that does is assume that we're all experts in this experience. And history hasn't been our friend at the moment because there's just so much that's that we're confronting every day that we've never seen before. So we're sort of making it up on the spot. And we need to do that together. And we'll make a mess of it many, many times. We'll make lots of mistakes. There'll be all sorts of government inquiries that will alarm everybody, but this is all that we've got. It's just us. So for me, and certainly for Leadership Victoria, by all means talk to Scott Coe here afterwards about Leadership Victoria if you're interested in that particular model. It's not that leadership is somebody's job, it's an activity. It's not like you need to have a title or a kind of big office or even an organisation where you've got a place in the hierarchy before you can lead. This is about people sharing generously, if you can find that, some level of goodness. You see, the mask example is a very good one. A private personal comment, I wear a mask a lot, and when I do that, it's for you, not for me. It's really simple, really simple. It is that I dignify, and this is just a private, I'm not asking anybody else to do that. For me, it's about dignifying your state of being. I don't even know you. You see, this is about saying the anonymous person, the person that I have no relationship with, but who is part of my community, is worthy of my respect. But you see, this is an act of choice. We live in a really secular environment, so I don't have a kind of set of tablets that have come down and actually told me to think about that. So I've chosen that as a way of being. And that makes me incredibly powerful. And for lots of us, we've got lots and lots of power in the positions that you do too. You see, normally on a Thursday night, you'd probably be doing something else, but you chose this. You're doing okay. I don't know what your circumstances are, but you're doing okay because you've got choice. You turned up here tonight and you could have done something else. My guess is that you probably had some food today, that you will probably go to shelter tonight. It'll keep you warm. That people love you, that you know other people that you could call if you had a problem. And there are thousands of people in Victoria who have none of that. So you think, I think that's worthy. I think you matter, and I think they do too. But this is a leap of faith. This is an act of choice that other people matter. You see, one of the things that I've learned about community leadership through Leadership Victoria and the other work that I've done is that you cannot insist on people caring. You can't make it a law. You can't oblige them. You can't mandate them. And you can't punish them if they don't. So one of the enemies of the common good, I think, is indifference. In other words, doing good stuff. And that, for many people at the moment, bottom of the Maslow, is probably fair enough. So the thing about leaders is at least I've been talking about them as if there's some other kind of hallowed group somewhere that are smarter than I am, bigger than I am, more able, more competent, more trustworthy, with more integrity. But they're not, you see, they're just us. They're not. They're just us. And so all of those human frailties and every contradiction that goes along with the species that we are, weird little group that we are, this sort of rock that floats around, comes into the leadership conversation. You see, we want people to be better and bigger and smarter, but maybe they're not. And so to kind of, what we do is we go shopping for leaders. We go, you now find somebody else. And we're disappointed, usually, because it's just us. And we fetch up in this work that's really hard and important, and we need each other. And then what about government, which is where I've come from? It's a classic, isn't it? It's always grey, not black and white. So you want government to look after you, but not too much. And only until next Tuesday, because then you want government out of your face. Except that when something goes wrong, you want government back again. So to work within the teeth of those contradictions is a really tricky position. So there's something there about values and those questions.
Of you, Christine, if you don't mind, is the belief in, understanding of a belief in the common good now, today, strong enough to overcome self-interest, which is the antichrist of common good, where everyone's got their own circumstances, driving their own decisions and opinions on different things. In the Boomer generation, it was a land of milk and honey, opportunity and everywhere. We didn't, I'm not a Boomer, but that's the way I perceived that generation. We didn't have to think about some of the broader issues that society faces now. And self-interest was right up there, above probably common good. But now we face these global challenges, at an unprecedented level. I am in a Brady Bunch house. I'm Rick
Yep.
Martin. I've got three of my partner's kids, and the opinions that fly around in that house, oh my gosh. Wow, they've got thoughts and they've got knowledge and opinions on everything. Are we now at the point where the belief and the desire for common good is strong enough to overcome self-interest? Because that's what I'm getting from my own household.
So I've just answered this very, very quickly, and I'm talking like a cartoon because I don't have a lot of time. So forgive me. I mean, these topics are much deeper than what I'm giving them the opportunity to. Just very quickly. These days, I'm happy to take a morsel of goodness and try to make it bigger, frankly. Which is why I don't look for right and wrong. I look for what better might look like. And if I can get a small number of people, even 2 people, to not necessarily agree, but work past and alongside that, I reckon my job's done for that day. You see, what I've looked for is stickiness and scale. In other words, the one-off activity, oh, that's okay, I'll take that, but I actually want it to be sticky, if that makes sense. In other words, that it attracts more and more and more and more and more. And then I get scale that the 2 people might make 5 next time, or 7, or 700, and that's what I'll work on. And there is a tiny bit of history that gives me courage there. Those big movements that the boomers and the pre-boomers, whatever they were, came up with. I mean, if you think about what used to be called the environmental movement, if you think about civil rights, if you think about the end of apartheid, a very small number of people started, just started, and brought others around them. So all I'm saying is that what works for me, and this is not a recommendation, is that I'll accept the morsel of shift, which is that even if people are angry, they loathe each other, their partisan politics are thriving, that they will get together to answer the question of what would better look like. And if 3 of them say, there it is, let's do that.
So is that to say that consensus and popularity is common good? Can common good exist in a purely democratic environment?
Well,
where everyone has a say, but guaranteed half the room's going to be split that way,
easy
half the
enough.
room's going to be split that way.
Well, we've just had an election and that's how it works. And literally it's, 51-49 or something like that. That's how it works. I think the common good versus self-interest, I think at a population level, the overall human race favours the common good. And it's one of these things of, especially in senior jobs that I've had recently, you have to inherently trust the human race that it's going to probably make the right decision for the common good. And that requires trust to actually, even though you've been absolutely hammered and nailed to the wall from all this self-interest, just literally lining you up, you sort of got to inherently trust the common good that we're going to be reaching to it. I know, for me to say that as a scientist, very unscientific. However, I think that's the underlying message overall, that because if you end up having self-interest and take everybody out, that's not very good either. So.
Thank you, Bruce. And I just wanted to acknowledge that we only have a few more minutes left of our panel discussion. And I did want to give Sarah and Steve a chance to speak to what we've moved to, or if you wanted to go back to talking about that kind of status quo and the changing relationships item.
I'll do a little bit more in the interest of time. First of all, I do think we're seeing a shift, and it is a generational shift. I certainly see it in the work that I do, and it's really encouraging, I might add. I also think that times of crisis bring the wool closer to the door and bring common good out. So I think we have to, make the best of the crisis opportunities. And the fact that those 2 things are happening a little bit together, this generational shift and sadly, the really obvious societal issues and environmental issues becoming more obvious to people, I think is creating some change. And I think that's really encouraging to see. And I do think we're getting leaders, and that's why I keep saying leaders are not about title and seniority and about old people, because we're seeing young leaders, and they're shaking and rattling, and it's really good to see. And to be honest, it's what gives me hope. And I do a bit of speaking and a bit of working with students, and they're the ones who are always the first who run up to me and say, why are we not being taught this at university? Why are we not having these conversations? So, I actually think the institutions do need to kind of catch up a little bit to where those conversations are going and where those minds are going. Just back to the question, and the reason we focus on relationships with shared value, and is really because I think leadership, when we think of leaders, we think of people out front, but that's not leadership. A big part of leadership is about sharing power so that we can create value together. And so we very much encourage businesses to realise that they don't have all the answers. In fact, they have very little answers, and they need to do, as Christine talked about, they need to do a listening. They need to get in relationship with the problem. They need to spend time doing that. And for me, that's what leadership is starting to look like, is actually taking a step back and thinking a bit more long term. And we're starting to see it. And I really think that as all of these things start to come together, we can be a little more hopeful than we've been in the past. But it's really complex and really hard. And those organisations that I work for that are trying to do the really hard stuff, the ecosystem stuff, I'm going to give you the segue here, because that's where you step in, and that's where we're now, kind of really starting to find that they're the answers. They're more complex. The easy stuff we've kind of already got to, and now it sounds like it's very much in your bailiwick of how we do this really complex stuff now.
Yeah, thanks. This question of self-interest versus the common good, I think when it comes down to a leader having to decide, does choosing the common good impact me personally? I think personal self-interest wins. I see that a lot, regardless of other contexts. We unfortunately see that a lot. But I completely agree with Sarah. I think this time now is really right. We haven't had it, well, at least in my lifetime, a situation where we've been facing this COVID overlaid with our climate context that we're seeing evidence for now. We are really facing these fundamental, huge challenges, and we are coalescing. Winston Churchill would say, want to unite a country, we go to war. We have things that we're warring against. And I think I'll just finish with a quote. One of my colleagues has written a book on Power and Love, which talks about what's needed in leadership in these complex issues. And he quotes Martin Luther King, who says that power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. So we need both those people who care and people in positions of authority to get together and do something about this. And I think time's perfect now. So what are we going to do? How do we move from that C+?
Well, please join me in thanking our panelists for sharing their time and their insights.